When I lived in Europe, going on cheap holidays was easy. Use any of the cheap budget airlines, find a random city in a country you've never heard of, and then just go. Do you want some sun, a city, perhaps even go somewhere cold? All of it was at your fingertips until I moved to Australia. How can such a large country that's so geographically isolated provide me with the same kind of cheap holiday that I was spoiled with in the UK? But wait, what's this? People in Australia are addicted to cruising? Never been on a cruise before. I wonder what it's like. So being the cheap bastard that I am, this is our experience on possibly the cheapest international cruise in Australia, so you don't have to. The cruise in question is the P&O Pacific Encounter, which travels from Brisbane to New Caledonia and Vanuatu. But it's not until I started to look at the reviews that I got a little bit concerned. I mean, after all, I've never been on a cruise before. I only want to see if it's a good use of my time and value for money. So undeterred by keyboard warriors slagging off my cruise, I decided to look at a few key areas. So in true fashion, I just googled what makes a good cruise. And it didn't really give me a lot of help, so I just came up with these 4 key areas. Number 1, probably most importantly, what are the rooms actually like? Secondly, if you're going to be on there for a week, how well are you going to be entertained? And unless you plan on starving yourself for 7 days, you're going to want to know what the food and dining options are. And then lastly, unless you're a weirdo that likes to stay on the boat the entire time, how good are the excursions? The cruise lasts a week, and for $4,030, we booked a balcony room. Fancy. And it also came with $200 onboard spending money. The room itself was, well, I'll let you decide. There was a walk-in wardrobe. I know. Pretty small, but enough space for all of us 4. Life jackets are always a nice touch. The bathroom itself had ample room to swing an animal, perhaps a cat or a small dog. And for anyone thinking, do these rooms come with a bath? No, there's a shower that you can just about slowly rotate in, like one of those bits of meat at the kebab shop. The room itself we had configured for 2 bunk beds, perfect for our 5 and 2-year-old. There's handy little rails at the top, so no one should be falling out of those very easily, and a small desk with some drawers to put things in. And then of course the balcony with 2 sun chairs, with leg rests that obviously move, and a questionable height barrier that made my heart sink every time my 2-year-old went too close. But at least if any of us fall off, we're only going to fall onto the deck below. Oh, and there's a TV. One tip I would say is to stock up on the 10 cans of soft drink that you're allowed per person, which you have to conveniently bring on board in your hand luggage. The room has a handy fridge to keep them cold, and it saves you a lot of money on the drinks packages. We didn't even finish all of our soft drinks. Despite the size of the room, I'd still give it a 7 out of 10. Beds were comfy enough, plenty of storage space for us for the week, and although the rooms were a little bit dated, I spent a lot more on worse conditioned hotels. And as you can see, in the end we just ended up pushing the beds together. But what are the facilities like on this 290 metre, 12 deck floating hotel? I'll start with the kids club because you'll either be interested or you won't. Kids can go from the age of 2. There's a big inside bit and an outside bit where they can go around on these little bikes. I didn't film any of the inside because there was too many other kids and that would be a bit weird. They make loads of artwork, which your kid gets pretty proud of. It's run by a fantastic team of non-Australians. And if you don't get your timing right, then you'll end up queuing for ages down the massive corridor that can really not fit that many people in it. The one big problem is if your kid isn't potty trained, then you have to keep coming back to change their bum. And they give you this handy little beeper every time you need to come back. More on that later. Well, I can tell you that this thing is bloody massive. When people say that they get lost on cruises, I can definitely see why. Who needs the gym when you can do about 50 billion steps just trying to find your way around it? As the first day of our cruise was at sea, just getting to our destinations, we spent most of the day just finding our feet. Now, if you're used to an all-inclusive style holiday where you essentially pay for everything up front and don't have to bring any money with you, you might find cruising a little bit strange because wherever you turn, they're just constantly looking for different ways to make you part with your money. Now, I'm used to staying at those places where everyone has to wear a little wristband just to prove that they've paid their way. But when you're on a cruise, to be honest, excuse the pun, everyone literally is on the same boat. That symbol is replaced by this little card that everyone seems to have around their neck, and by the magic of digital currency, you can just part with your life savings. Now, I know that I had about $200 worth of onboard spending to get through, but knowing that all I had to do was simply tap or swipe my card to get whatever I wanted on this floating tub kind of made me feel a little bit uneasy, particularly when there's a casino on board. And speaking of feeling uneasy, after a while you do get a little bit peckish. And after those reviews that I'd read about the quality of the food, I didn't really know what to expect. Now the food situation here can be split into 3 different categories. First of all, somewhere called the Pantry, where you get all of your main free meals, starting with breakfast, then lunch, then dinner, all on rotation, so you never really get the same thing. There's lots of different types of food to choose from. Some are served to you, some you have to get yourself. And I'm not going to lie, we ended up eating here most of the time. And the main reason for that is because the second option that you have is the pre-booked a la carte restaurants. Now these on paper do seem pretty fancy. You have to reserve a table, which we did using the online booking app, but could never really find a time that would suit us, probably because they were all booked. The third option was the fancier restaurants. Now these were a bit like the a la carte free ones that were part of your deal. You had to pre-book them, but then you also had to pay extra. Now I'm not going to lie, we didn't review any of those, because, well, really they just didn't look that worth it. And then the last option is the multitude of different snacks that you could just buy. Pizzas and chips and hot chips and stuff like that. And again, why would you pay for those if you could just go to the pantry and eat as much food as you want for free? I don't understand these people that just sit there gorging themselves on food when they go on an all-you-can-eat. I'm just going to put it out there. If that's you, you're a fat glutton. No one needs to eat the amount of food that is available on a cruise. Now people seem to slag off the pantry bit. I don't really think it was that bad. After a few days we figured out they had early seatings for the kids, so that you could just get them fed on kids related stuff and they wouldn't turn their nose up at the more adult related flavours, and then you could just pack them off to the kids club so you could sit there and eat in peace. That gets this place extra points. To be honest, it didn't get too repetitive. There were some days, I remember when they served prawns, and oh my god, it was like trying to drive to the city on a Monday morning down the highway. But most of the time it was just pretty easy. The kids seemed to enjoy themselves. I never went away hungry, and even the wife seemed to enjoy some of the options.
Now, if you're watching this because you live in Australia, then I'm not going to lie, the sponsor of this video probably won't be for you. But if you're watching this because you want to move to Australia and take a really cheap cruise, or you just want to live here long term, then the sponsor of this video, True Blue Migration Services, might be able to help you out. Because you see, they're one of Australia's oldest and most reputable MARA registered agents, and they're basically whizzes when it comes to getting your permanent residency visa, or any visa for Australia for that matter. And the best thing is when you upload your CV or resume to them and mention us, not only will you get a free visa assessment where they'll tell you exactly what visas are available to you, but also by mentioning us, you're going to save $200 of the cost of your visa. And those things are bloody expensive, so any money saved is probably better. We've worked with them exclusively for about the last 4 years, and we've been able to help hundreds, if not thousands of people with their journey to move to Australia. So if you're wondering what your next steps are for moving here, and why I'm even sat on some stairs, check the link in the description for their details down below, and you never know, it might be the best decision you make today. Now back to the video.
Now after discussing the food, we have to move on to entertainment. And to be honest, this is probably one of the most interesting areas when it comes to this cruise, because let's face it, there is a lot of different types of entertainment on board. I would go as far as to say there is probably something for everyone, and I know that that sounds a little bit cliche, but to be honest it's true. And when I looked through all of the reviews, I couldn't see anything negative specifically about the entertainment, so I didn't really know what to expect. But when it comes to things to do, I mean I've lost count of how many pools there were. I'm not even going to bother to try and remember it. We tried a few of them, didn't necessarily like the inside one. We liked the one out the back because it had really accessible places for the kids to swim, and it wasn't just full of other kids trying to dive bomb everything. It's got these massive slides that you can go on, but you can't go on them with a camera, so I didn't even bother going on it. I'm too old for slides. There was a zipline thing, somewhere that you could play basketball, that was always busy. I think this was called shuffleboard, but that was also busy, so I never really played it, especially when you can watch it from the hot tub. That was far more interesting. There was this exclusive pool area with a hot tub. God knows how much extra that would have cost, and obviously something that I wasn't prepared to pay for. But if you're worried about loads of kids everywhere and you're just there with your adult friends, then they do have a really cool adults pool out the back. Just a whole adults area really. You could get really sloshed back here, and you wouldn't have to feel the shame of your children. And to be honest, I think this is probably one of the best views on the boat. There was a gym, which to be honest, it got really busy at certain times. I went when it wasn't so busy so that I could film myself like a weirdo. Not many people really looked at me, but I wasn't there for them. I was there to get a nice pump. No, I was there to just film it to show you really. They've got a spa, you have to walk through the spa to get to the gym. They had this massive atrium where they kind of played music all the time. And there was lots of different bars where you could go and listen to music. And if you're also really into just sitting there and watching things, when you just scroll through their little appy thing, there's so many different shows on all the time. Obviously run by major professionals that you think you've heard of, but you haven't really. They even let you take part in some of the shows. My wife had a go at the hypnotism. She's always wanted to find out if she could actually be hypnotised. And after successfully making it through the first audition, that's basically where they ask you, do you believe in hypnotism? She had a bloody good go and, well, turns out she can't be hypnotised. And obviously rather than just walking out, she thought to herself, hey Ross, why don't you have a go? My wife has this thing where she really likes to laugh at people. Very supportive really, it's a wonderful relationship that we have. And when she asked the question of, oh, can Ross be hypnotised? Turns out he can, and then he's made to do all kinds of weird stuff. To be honest, when I look back at the footage, I think I got picked on by this hypnotist. I didn't really know what was happening. All I can remember is that when he was asking me to do things, it just felt good to do them. Like when you do a good deed. But instead he was making me pretend to do loads of weird stuff. I think he's got a bit of a kink really. But it's a nice way to get to know your fellow passengers, you know, just acting a prat on stage. They also seem to have lots of themed nights. I mean, not overly loads. Every other night really, just in case you're wondering, do I have to get dressed up all of the time? The themes are pretty easy, just wear a funky shirt most of the time. But they did have this Great Gatsby one, and to be honest, lots of people look fantastic. I just look like a Victorian chimney sweep. Lots of different parties for the kids, and some for the adults. I can imagine if you're on one of the alcoholic drinks packages, you're going to find these absolutely amazing. We weren't, we just pay as you go, so we had to look after our children most of the time. But if you're looking for one of these cruises where you can just sit down and relax, I mean, to be honest, it's rammed. It's so busy, you're not really going to relax. And with the amount of entertainment that there is on the ship, and the fact that you've kind of paid for it, I just think you'd have to be a little bit weird to not go and have a little look-see, particularly if this is your first time. Like us, and it was our first time cruising, so we had absolutely no idea. Now, unless you come from the UK, you might not necessarily get this next comment, but it did feel a little bit like Butlins. Not in a bad way, but to me it did just have a little bit of a holiday camp vibe. And some people are really into that, and that's fine. But if you ever thought to yourself, do you know what, I just need 5 minutes rest, I'm going to go back to my room, have a little bit of a relax. Yeah, well, you can't do that because some people go on the cruise and they just let their feral kids run around all the time and bang around in their rooms when your 2-year-old is trying to have a nap. I don't want to be a whinging pom, but I do sometimes think that the entertainment is a little bit more aimed for adults. They even have an onboard nightclub that's conveniently located at the back of the ship. I obviously never went there when it was a club. Got 2 little kids to look after and the kids club doesn't go on that late. I probably would have just woken up with a hangover and regret anyway. But what about the excursions? Because let's face it, if you've come to sail away on a lovely cruise ship, you don't really want to spend all of your time on it. And especially if this is an international cruise, you want to sample some culture. But when I started to look at the reviews, I mean, that's probably the lesson, isn't it really? Don't look at the reviews. But the excursions factor of a cruise is something that lots of people wanted to write about. So our first stop was Luganville in Vanuatu. I'd never heard of it, I'd only just about heard of Vanuatu. But when you think of Vanuatu, you kind of think of tropical paradise. And when you first arrive at Luganville, you kind of think, yeah, it really isn't. We arrived there in the morning, my youngest daughter had just woken up. Slightly confused as to why she could see land. After a good old stare, we decided to get off the boat and were greeted by a very industrious looking town. No one's really checking passports here. You just kind of get off, walk through a market where people are selling lots of lovely collectibles. And being the organised people that we were, we had absolutely nothing planned to do. And we weren't overly disappointed because look at the weather. Now I know that you don't pay for the weather when you come to these kind of places, but you do hope that it's going to be a little bit sunny. So what better to do in rubbish weather than just, let's see how long it takes to walk to the nearest town. And my god, it was a walk. But it's okay because I'm pushing a buggy along and then it starts raining. We pass a few people and then we wonder to ourselves, what actually is there to do in Luganville? Well, apparently this place was kind of important during the Second World War. Lots of things were sunk around here. So we decided to head for the museum to celebrate all of these things. But as we got even closer, the rain just kept coming down and down and down. And to be honest, we just had nothing to prepare ourselves for the sheer volume of water that was falling out of the sky. And after about 30 minutes of hard rain walking, we finally got there. And we realised it was $10 each person to get in, including the children. And the size of it wasn't particularly big, and I wasn't prepared to pay $10 for each of my kids to just whinge about why they were wet and all the things were boring. So I had a quick look at other things around there. There was the sea, some really old derelict buildings, some kind of celebration going on. I think it was a church. and after realising there were pretty much no taxis to take us back to the port, we just thought we'd have to walk again. But thankfully the sun started to come out a little bit. Vanuatuan storms don't last all day, which is a good thing. And we found this nice little cafe restaurant. To be honest, this was the highlight of the trip really, and all the money that we saved on not going into the museum we decided to pour into here. Because I hadn't had a beer in about 3 days, I decided to have one of them. And some local hot chips. I don't even know what these were made out of, I think it was some kind of potato. The kids enjoyed themselves, the adults enjoyed themselves. It was actually a really nice part of the stay. But threatened by the idea of being left here alone, we decided we pretty much have to go back to the boat. And the girls wanted to get their hair braided at the market. That was about $10 each as well. Even the little one decided that she wanted to sit down and have her hair braided like her big sister and mummy. Mate, they all look pretty cool, and I got to have another beer. So I did really feel like I was giving back to the Vanuatuan economy. Is that how you say it, Vanuatuan? To be honest, Luganville, I'm happy that I've been here. Disappointed by the fact that it probably wasn't the best weather for me, but I can't blame them for that. But I think to myself, if I'd never visited here on a boat, I probably wouldn't cry about it. Other people talked about how they did day trips a bit further afield, but obviously the weather was a bit of an impact. And thankfully this wasn't the only stop on our trip, so I did have a few more hopes for our next stop at Port Vila.
Did you have fun, Aurora?
Yeah!
Did you have fun, Sierra? I think that's a yes.
I'll take that no.
Mummy, did you have fun?
Great.
What was the best part about it?
I'm just walking in the rain, being drenched.
What was your favourite part, Aurora?
Getting my coconut and my hair done.
Come all the way to Vanuatu.
Look at
My
us.
hair braided and a coconut. Nice. What did you like, Sierra? Ready for your nap?
Good.
You like the pouch. Wonderful. Wonderful stuff.
Would Port Vila be any better? Well, I guess we're going to find out. Now, one of the things that I did enjoy about visiting these places on a cruise was the fact that in the mornings you just seemed to wake up in a new location. It felt a bit weird just pulling into a new port, waving at some of the locals, and everything just feeling a little bit different. Now, when we arrived at Port Vila, it was a lot different to Luganville. And whilst it didn't necessarily scream to me tropical paradise, I did get a little bit more of a tropical paradise vibe. And considering that's pretty much the opposite of what we got when we went to Luganville, we decided when we got off the boat this time that we were definitely going to go on a full excursion. But we hadn't booked anything. We hadn't used one of the little teller machines to organise something through P&O because we're mavericks and we just do it on our own. And we're tight, just really cheap. So rather than haggling with these fellas who were screaming at us through the fence, we first checked at the information to see how much they were charging for our day trips, so that we could then try our best haggling with people outside, knowing roughly how much to spend. Now you do unfortunately hear about people getting scammed while they're on holiday, but after we got quoted nearly $500 for a trip for us four, we thought, nah, what could go wrong if we just take a punt with a local driver? So we decided to go with Thomas, who for a reasonable $200 said he'd drive us around the island for the day. And our first stop was a supposed turtle sanctuary where you could swim with actual real life turtles. Obviously this appealed to my wife and daughters, who could turn up an opportunity to swim with turtles. Well, to be honest, it wasn't the fantasy that we were really expecting. Yes, it did seem a bit like a turtle refuge. They had this hatchery for baby ones. They even had a bit where you could feel what local lizards were like. Yeah, they're a bit mental. But after spending $50 for the four of us, the experience did seem a little bit hectic. Some people would probably say really cruel. I mean, I'm not necessarily disagreeing. At the end of the day, you're swimming within a sea inlet filled with lots of people, and you're just snorkeling around trying not to step on any turtles. To be honest, I was a little bit disappointed. But how else would you swim with turtles if they weren't penned in a little area? Don't get me wrong, all of this wasn't necessarily ideal, but I did feel that at least I was spending a little bit of money on the Vanuatuan economy. And what else would these people be doing if they weren't trying to run a little business? At the end of the day, this is the world we live in, and we're very fortunate that we live in Australia. But nevertheless, we did kind of hope that there would be somewhere else better. Now Thomas, he was a very good guide. Obviously at the back of my mind I was still worried about getting ripped off, but I put my faith in him and asked, is there anywhere else better to swim? He knew a place down the road, not too far, a little bit cheaper than the turtles, so we thought why not? It's either back to the boat or we give it a go. Now if you go to Vanuatu, swimming in blue holes is kind of a thing, and we felt like we missed out on one when we went to Luganville and didn't go. But there is also one if you go to Port Vila, and I would happily say that it's probably one of the better ones to go to. I mean, I didn't go to the others, so I don't have anything to base it on. But when you get here, you finally get that full tropical island vibe. Look at the place. It's awesome. Full of jumps, rope swings, swimming in crystal clear although a little bit leafy water. You can't beat it. Beers, strong beers, and even if you've got little kids like us, they both love swimming in it. And unless you're going to do anything stupid like jumping off really high jumps like an idiot, then it all feels pretty safe. To be honest, this was one of the best things that I think that we did on our cruise, and totally worth the $40 that we paid to get in. We probably spent most of our time here, and why wouldn't you? Just look at it.
What was your favourite bit?
Swinging in.
Swinging in. You did some really big swings. And you jumped in with Daddy, didn't you? What's been your favourite today? Doing this or swimming with the turtle?
Turtle.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't think so, but you can't please everyone, I guess. So then became the long drive back towards the boat, and to be honest, I was just over the fact that if I was going to get scammed. But we had one more request of Thomas, and it was partly down to my daughter's fascination with coconuts. She'd had a go on a coconut in Luganville, but it seems that every time she steps off the boat she wants another one. But what came next was possibly our deepest connection to Vanuatu. Thomas stopped at one of those markets by the side of the road, and we actually saw what the real people of Vanuatu are like. They're warm, friendly, genuine. And I think sometimes when you go on excursions to these kind of places, you never really see that. I don't know if my daughters will ever remember this connection, but I hope when they see this in years to come, they're going to remember that excursions aren't just about paying money to do things that you haven't really done before, but actually making connections with real people. If you ever go to Port Vila, I can totally recommend Thomas. He's a fantastic guy, so knowledgeable, and with him I've never felt safer in another country. Give him a ring, tell him we sent you.
If you come to Vanuatu, ask for Thomas.
Cheers, I give you the best service you ever.
So overall, how would we score Australia's cheapest international cruise? Well, with the boat itself and the rooms, to be honest, they're not the greatest. We had a balcony room, which isn't the most fancy, but it also isn't the biggest. Everything seemed a little bit dated, but they were cleaned fantastically by the staff, had everything that we really needed, and it might sound a little bit harsh, but in my opinion it was a 6 out of 10. Dining wise, while we didn't go with anything too fancy, we didn't pay any extra for our food, so everything was all inclusive, and we had a couple of goes in the different restaurants that were aside from the Pantry itself, and I can't really complain. Sure, everything wasn't exactly the tastiest thing in the world, but you could never complain with the volume of food on offer, the choices that they had, and to be honest, it's our own fault for not getting our arse in gear and booking more of the free restaurant options. I don't normally give halves, but I don't think it's an 8 out of 10, so I'd go 7.5 out of 10. Entertainment wise, well, I guess it depends on really what you're into. But you can't fault it for choice. There are so many different things that you can do for all age ranges. And whilst I would say that it's probably a little bit limited for the smallest members of your group, in my opinion you'd have to be a bit of a weirdo to not at least find something to do. Sure, after a week you might be a little bit sick of it, but for first time cruisers like us, I can't really complain. And they get extra points for hypnotising me as well. Again, 8 out of 10. So on to the last bit. How are the excursions? And again, these seem a little bit hit and miss, but it does really depend on how organised you are. If you're going on these cruises to focus on the destinations that you're visiting, then I'm sure that you'll be able to find some really cool things to do. We did. Again, some weren't the greatest, but we didn't do a lot of research. Maybe we're not the type of people that just want to be carted around like tourists. But surprisingly for me, I found being off the boat some of the best time of our cruise. If it wasn't for the people that we met, or some of the places that we'd gone, I think I would have been a bit more disappointed. 9 out of 10. Despite how reasonably happy we were with the cruise, would we go on it again? I mean, it's really handy that it sailed out of the same city that we live in. We enjoyed ourselves for the week that we were away, but no, it doesn't inspire me to make me want to go again. What it does inspire me though is to try out cruising a little bit more. What would one of the fancier boats be like? How different is it if you just stay within Australia? That would be a cool way to explore the country. So stay tuned to see what our next Australian cruise will be like. Follow us if you want to see more of our Australian life down under. And if you want to live here, then make sure to check out our friends True Blue Migration Services. I'll see you next time.